My parents handed my renovated loft to my divorced brother and told me to take the loss. So I shut down the smart home, called the police, documented every dollar of damage, and took him to court for $25,000. I had just spent 2 brutal weeks on a commercial construction site in Texas, fighting delayed supply chains, incompetent subcontractors, and a heat wave that felt capable of melting steel beams into puddles. By the time I returned home, I wanted only 3 things: a hot shower, a heavy pour of bourbon, and the absolute silence of my own apartment. I dragged my duffel bag through the dim industrial hallway of my building. The familiar smell of old brick mixed with roasted coffee from the cafe downstairs, signaling to my exhausted brain that I was finally off the clock. I stopped in front of my door, a heavy steel slab painted matte black. It was my pride and joy. I touched the glass surface of the smart lock. The keypad illuminated with a crisp white glow, and I entered my 6-digit code. The lock blinked red. Access denied. I stared at it for a second. Maybe I had pressed the wrong number. My fingers were stiff after the flight, and exhaustion had a way of making simple things feel complicated. I rolled my shoulders, took a breath, and entered the code again, slowly this time, making sure every press registered. The red light flashed again. Access denied. Master code overridden. For a moment, the words did not register. Master code overridden? I was a civil engineer and a licensed general contractor. I did not believe in ghosts hiding inside machines. Systems did exactly what they were programmed to do. If my master code had been overridden, then a physical human being with backup access had deliberately bypassed the digital security system. I stood alone in the hallway, staring at the control panel. I did not pound on the door. I did not shout. My hands did not shake. Instead, a cold, heavy clarity settled into my stomach. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. She answered on the second ring, sounding bright, breezy, and entirely too cheerful for a Thursday evening. "Vance, honey, I'm so glad you called. I was meaning to reach out earlier this week, but things have been completely out of control around here." I kept my voice level. "Mom, why has the master code on my apartment door been overridden?" There was a slight pause. It was the kind of pause people made when they knew an impact was coming but still hoped they might somehow avoid it. "Well," she began, shifting into the soft, placating tone she always used when trying to smooth over a disaster. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. We had to move Ethan in." I stared at my black steel door. "Ethan? My 25-year-old brother? What are you talking about?" "Oh, Vance, try to have a little compassion," she sighed, immediately reaching for guilt. "You know the divorce is finalized. Sophia kicked him out of the house, and he has absolutely nowhere to go. He's devastated, honey. His whole life is falling apart. Your father and I couldn't let him sleep in his car or stay in some cheap motel. So you let him into my home while I was out of state?" "You're single, Vance," she replied, growing more confident now that the secret was exposed. "You're 28, and you make good money. You can easily stay in a nice hotel for a while or rent another place. Ethan needs stability right now. He needs the comfort of a nice home so he can get his head straight. You owe your brother this much. Just take the hit for the family, okay? Be the bigger person." She continued talking about family unity, sacrifice, compassion, and forgiveness, but I had already stopped listening. They had not asked for permission. They had simply taken my home. I let her continue, listening to her justify what amounted to a home invasion. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke. "I'll handle it." Her voice immediately brightened. "Oh, thank you, Vance. I knew you would understand. You've always been the reliable one. We'll have you over for dinner on Sunday to celebrate." I ended the call. The silence of the hallway returned all at once. I dropped my duffel bag onto the concrete floor, opened the front compartment, and pulled out my rugged contractor laptop. Then, I sat cross-legged directly outside my own door and powered it on. I worked as a contractor, but my specialty was modern infrastructure. When I rebuilt the loft, I had not simply wired it for electricity. I had wired it for absolute control. The smart home system was enterprise-grade, closer to what you would find in a high-end commercial property than an ordinary apartment. I opened the administration portal. Within 30 seconds, I was inside the security system. The logs told me everything. 4 days earlier, at exactly 2 in the afternoon, someone had used the physical emergency backup key to unlock the door. That was the key I had placed in a sealed envelope inside my father's safe, intended only for a genuine life-or-death emergency. 10 minutes after the door opened, the system recorded a manual hard reset on the interior control panel. My fingerprint profile and 6-digit access code had been deleted and replaced with a new one. They believed they had locked me out. What they did not understand was that a physical reset did not sever the cloud administration rights. Not if the owner knew the backdoor protocols. I did not knock. I did not scream Ethan's name. I let my fingers move across the keyboard. First, I entered the network router and permanently blocked every MAC address currently connected to my Wi-Fi. Whatever phone, laptop, television, gaming system, or tablet Ethan had brought into my home instantly lost internet access. Next, I opened the climate controls. It was a crisp 45 degrees outside. I overrode the thermostat and shut down the entire heating matrix. Then I accessed the smart breaker panel. I killed the power to the entertainment center, the kitchen appliances, the water heater, and every electrical outlet in the living area. The only thing I left active was a single harsh overhead light in the bathroom. Finally, I locked the permissions. No one inside the apartment could restore any of those systems without my digital authorization. I closed the laptop, returned it to my bag, and stood up. I adjusted my jacket, picked up my luggage, and turned my back on my own door. The nearest police precinct was 6 blocks away. I did not run. I walked at a steady, controlled pace through the cold evening air. The anger inside me was not hot or explosive. It was freezing cold, the kind of anger that calculated structural loads, studied every weak point, and prepared to tear something down with absolute precision. The precinct smelled like stale coffee, floor wax, and exhausted people. I approached the front desk, where a sergeant looked up from his monitor and glanced at my dust-covered boots and heavy work jacket. "Can I help you?" I set my duffel bag on the counter and removed a thick manila folder from the side pocket. I traveled with hard copies of my most important documents. In the construction business, you quickly learned that having physical evidence could save you when technology failed or someone decided to lie. I need to report a breaking and entering and the illegal occupation of my property. The sergeant sighed and reached for a notepad. Domestic or stranger? My brother. He used a stolen emergency key to access my home, changed the electronic locks, and took up residence while I was out of state. I have the lease, utility bills in my name, my state identification, and digital security logs proving the unauthorized entry. I slid the folder across the counter. I want him removed. To understand how my family reached the point where stealing my home seemed reasonable, you need to understand the house where Ethan and I grew up. I was 3 years older than him, but from the moment he learned to walk, the universe was expected to revolve around him. There was a psychological term for someone like Ethan, the golden child. He was loud, charismatic, and constantly demanded attention. I was quiet and observant. I liked taking things apart to understand how they worked. My parents never openly announced which son they preferred. They revealed it through 1,000 small decisions. If Ethan broke a window while playing baseball, it was an accident. Boys would be boys. If I left a tool on the workbench, I received a lecture about responsibility and respecting other people's property. I started mowing lawns at 14 so I could buy my own clothes. Ethan received a brand new sports car for his high school graduation because my parents did not want him to feel inferior to his friends. The rule in our family was never spoken aloud, but it was absolute. Vance handled his own problems. The family handled Ethan's problems. Ethan's greatest achievement was marrying Sophia. She was intelligent, beautiful, and came from serious generational wealth. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships. When Ethan married her, my parents behaved as though he had won the Nobel Peace Prize. They bragged to everyone about their son's enormous suburban house, his expensive lifestyle, and his country club memberships. But Ethan had never learned how to build anything, least of all a marriage. He treated his wealthy wife like another parent, someone who existed to provide for him while he did whatever he wanted. He spent Sophia's money, refused to maintain a steady job, and eventually began sleeping with other women. Sophia did not tolerate it. She was not my mother. 3 weeks before I returned from Texas, she packed Ethan's expensive clothes into garbage bags, left them in the driveway, changed the locks on her house, and handed him divorce papers. When Ethan fell, he fell hard. As always, my parents raced to catch him. They threw themselves into a frenzy, searching for a way to cushion the consequences for their perfect boy. The problem was that they lived in a small 2-bedroom retirement condominium. They did not have the space or luxury Ethan had become accustomed to. Then they looked at me. I was the reliable son who never asked them for anything. I had a stable career, a good income, and a beautiful home I had recently finished rebuilding. They saw my stability and decided it was the perfect sacrifice to place at Ethan's feet. They believed that because we shared blood, everything I achieved was a communal family asset, available to be redistributed whenever the golden child stumbled. They also had no understanding of what that apartment meant to me. To them, It was merely a place to sleep. They knew nothing about the blood, sweat, and force of will it had taken to create it. 2 years earlier, I had discovered the space above a failing printing press. It was a derelict storage loft with a leaking roof, dangerous electrical wiring, and concrete floors buried beneath decades of grime. Nobody wanted it, but I was a civil engineer. I did not see garbage. I saw the bones of the structure. I saw exposed brick hidden beneath cheap drywall, massive steel I-beams, open space, and potential. I negotiated an ironclad 10-year lease with the building's owner. The agreement allowed me to gut and renovate the loft in exchange for a locked-in rental rate. For 6 months, I effectively worked 2 jobs. During the day, I managed commercial construction sites. At night, I rebuilt my own home. I demolished rotting walls with a sledgehammer until my hands bled through my gloves. I rented an industrial grinder and spent 3 weekends on my knees, stripping the old concrete floor down to the aggregate before pouring and leveling a flawless epoxy finish. I rewired the entire electrical system myself, pulling miles of copper through old conduits. I designed and built a custom kitchen, including a massive solid concrete countertop that required 4 men to lift into place. I installed smart glass in the bathroom, automated blackout shades, and a security system that could have protected a bank. The loft was not simply an apartment. It was my resume. It was the physical proof of my competence, a sanctuary designed and built to my exact specifications. I still remembered the only time Ethan had visited after I moved in. He arrived wearing designer loafers purchased with Sophia's credit card. He looked around at the exposed brick, visible ductwork, concrete surfaces, and industrial design, then wrinkled his nose. "You actually live here?" he asked with a laugh. "It looks like a sweatshop. Sophia and I have a guest house bigger than this. Why do you always have to be so blue-collar, Vance?" He had mocked it. He had looked at the result of the hardest work I had ever done and called it garbage. Now, because he had destroyed his own life, he believed he could enter the home he had insulted, change the locks, and claim it. As I watched the desk sergeant examine my paperwork, something inside me finally broke. It was not loud or dramatic. It felt like the quiet, permanent click of a lock falling into place. The final thread of obligation I felt toward my parents disappeared. The obedient son who always kept the peace and stepped aside was gone. In his place was a contractor who had discovered unauthorized personnel on his job site. I was going to clear the site. Police officers generally disliked becoming involved in property disputes. They often preferred to classify them as civil matters. But my documentation left no room for ambiguity. I had the signed lease, utility records, construction permits in my name, and digital logs showing exactly when the lock had been tampered with. 30 minutes later, I walked back through my building's brick hallway with 2 uniformed officers beside me. The heavy sound of our boots echoed against the walls. Officer Miller, a broad-shouldered veteran with a no-nonsense expression, stepped up to my steel door and knocked hard. "Police, open up." For several seconds, there was silence. Then we heard movement and fumbling from inside. The door opened. Ethan stood in front of us, and the sight alone made my jaw tighten. He was wearing my dark gray, heavy cotton bathrobe. In his right hand was one of my crystal tumblers, filled with amber liquid I immediately recognized as my 18-year-old Macallan Scotch. His confusion quickly turned to irritation. Then he noticed me standing behind the officers, and panic flashed across his face. "What's going on?" he asked. "Sir, are you the legal resident of this apartment?" Officer Miller asked, resting one hand casually near his duty belt. Ethan immediately became the victim, a role he had practiced his entire life. He puffed out his chest and arranged his face into an expression of wounded innocence. "Yes. I mean, it's a family home. My brother let me stay here because I'm going through a terrible divorce. I'm only trying to get back on my feet, and he's having some sort of mental breakdown." He tried to reverse the situation in front of the police, denying what he had done, attacking me, and presenting himself as my victim. The lie came so naturally that it was almost impressive. I stepped forward with the manila folder in my hand. "Officer, I never gave this man permission to enter my home. I have been out of state for 2 weeks. He used a stolen backup key, entered the premises, and altered the electronic locks to deny me access. You already have the digital records and my lease agreement." Ethan's face turned dark red. "Vance, what the hell are you doing? Mom said it was fine. You can't throw me onto the street. We're blood." "Sir," Officer Miller interrupted, his tone hardening, "the lease is solely in Mr. Vance's name. You have no legal standing here. Changing the locks on a residence you do not own constitutes an illegal eviction. You have 10 minutes to collect the personal belongings you brought with you and vacate the premises. Otherwise, you will leave in handcuffs for trespassing and breaking and entering. But I live here now, Ethan whined as his sophisticated facade collapsed. Mom gave me the key. She said this place was mine until I got back on my feet. Then you can discuss that with your mother, the second officer said as he stepped through the doorway. 10 minutes. Start moving. Ethan looked at me with pure hatred. He slammed the crystal tumbler onto my concrete counter, spilling the expensive scotch, and stormed toward the bedroom. I remained in the doorway and surveyed the living room. The immaculate home I had left behind was now filthy. Takeout containers covered the coffee table. My carefully arranged bookshelves had been shoved aside to create space for Ethan's massive gaming monitor. Exactly 9 minutes later, Ethan emerged dragging two large designer suitcases. He was breathing hard and glaring at me. "You're a monster, Vance," he spat. "Mom and Dad will never forgive you. You're dead to this family." I looked at him without emotion. "Drop the robe, Ethan." He blinked. "What?" "That is my bathrobe. Take it off." He stared at me while both officers watched in silence. Humiliation spread across his face. With shaking hands, he removed the thick robe, leaving himself standing in the hallway in a wrinkled t-shirt and sweatpants. He threw the robe at my feet, grabbed his suitcases, and marched toward the elevator, muttering curses. The officers remained until they confirmed that Ethan had left the building. They gave me an incident report number and recommended replacing the physical lock cylinder immediately. I thanked them, closed the door, and finally stood alone inside my home. The victory lasted only a moment. I restored the lighting with the master controls on my phone and examined the apartment properly. The engineer and me took control. It was time to assess the damage. I moved through the space as the adrenaline faded and was replaced by the cold, hyper-focused analytical state I entered whenever I evaluated a compromised commercial job site. I did not feel like a helpless victim whose sanctuary had been violated. I felt like a forensic auditor entering a disaster zone, ready to calculate the exact cost of another person's catastrophic negligence. I went directly to my home office, opened the heavy fireproof safe built into the wall, and removed my professional digital single-lens reflex camera. I attached a high-powered external flash, then collected my leather-bound contractor logbook, two heavy-duty graphite pencils, and a steel tape measure. I intended to document every millimeter. Ethan had occupied my home for only 4 days, a total of 96 hours. But a man who had never respected hard labor and who always expected a wealthy wife or enabling parents to clean up his messes could cause an astonishing amount of destruction in 96 hours. I began in the kitchen. The center island was the feature I was most proud of in the entire loft. I had poured it myself using a custom high-strength glass fiber reinforced concrete mixture. I spent countless hours polishing it with diamond grit pads until the surface felt as smooth as glass. Then I sealed it beneath premium commercial-grade epoxy resin. I walked to the spot where Ethan had slammed down the tumbler. The spilled scotch was not the real problem. He had been slicing fresh lemons directly on the surface without using a cutting board. Citric acid had eaten through the protective epoxy, leaving deep, cloudy white etch marks inside the dark concrete matrix. That damage could not be removed with a sponge. Repairing it would require industrial wet grinders to strip the entire 12-foot surface down to its base layer. The concrete would then need to be polished again, and a new coat of resin would have to be applied across the entire island so it cured evenly. The specialized labor alone would cost thousands. I took 4 high-resolution photographs from different angles, positioning the flash so the chemical burns were clearly visible. Next, I inspected the living room floor. During the renovation, I had installed 3/4-inch solid Brazilian walnut planks over a premium sound-dampening subfloor. Brazilian walnut was exceptionally dense. Damaging it required considerable force. I knelt and ran my hand over a series of deep, jagged gouges, stretching 14 feet across the center of the room. Ethan had dragged his oversized designer suitcases across the bare wood. One suitcase apparently had a broken metal wheel, and instead of lifting it, he had pulled it through the apartment. The scratches were far too deep to polish away. A proper repair meant removing the baseboards, pulling out the damaged interlocking planks, installing replacements, and sanding and refinishing the entire living room floor so the new wood matched the existing color without visible seams. I placed my bright yellow steel tape measure beside the gouges and took a dozen close-up photographs showing their exact length and depth. The master bathroom was worse. I had installed a smart glass shower enclosure that transitioned from transparent to completely frosted with the press of a switch. The system no longer worked. The waterproof digital control panel on the subway tiled wall had been cracked. probably because Ethan had thrown something heavy at it during one of his tantrums. The liquid crystal layer inside the glass had begun bleeding, creating a large, dark blotch in the middle of the shower door. The entire custom glass panel would have to be removed, reordered from the manufacturer, and installed by a specialist. I continued methodically through every room. On the balcony railing, I found black burn marks where Ethan had extinguished cigars directly against the finish. The brushed stainless steel refrigerator door had a noticeable dent. Several bottles of high-end liquor were missing from my cabinet. My Egyptian cotton sheets were covered with wine stains so severe that they had to be discarded. I stood amid the mess created by my own brother and reviewed the photographs on my camera. Before I explain how I forced him to pay for every penny, tell me in the comments whether your family has ever crossed a line so severe that you had to establish a permanent boundary. With every click of the shutter, the mental spreadsheet in my head expanded. I was not pricing the damage as a forgiving older brother willing to ignore a few scratches. I was pricing it exactly as a licensed general contractor would price the destruction caused by a reckless tenant. I calculated the current retail value of every premium replacement material, the industry markup for expedited shipping, and the hourly rates of qualified master tradesmen. I also included my own professional rate for managing and supervising the restoration project. When the inspection was complete, I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and created a new project file. I named it Ethan's Eviction. I uploaded every high-resolution photograph, attached the smart lock access records, and drafted a formal itemized contractor estimate. The total was slightly more than $25,000. I looked at the figure on my screen and felt only cold, satisfying clarity. Ethan was going to pay. When I woke the following morning, my phone was a war zone. There were 47 missed calls and dozens of text messages. My mother had left 3 long voicemails. Her tone changed dramatically from one recording to the next. In the first, she bargained and pleaded, asking me to calm down and speak with them. In the second, she sobbed furiously and accused me of throwing my brother onto the freezing streets. The third contained nothing but rage. My father sent an enormous wall of text describing how I was single-handedly destroying our supposedly loving family. He complained that Ethan was sleeping on their uncomfortable living room sofa, that my mother had cried all night, and that he was disgusted by my lack of compassion. Then the extended family joined in. Aunts and cousins I had not spoken to in more than 3 years suddenly began calling and messaging me. They described me as ruthless, heartless, and monstrous. According to them, I cared more about a stupid apartment than I did about human life. I did not answer a single message. I used the gray rock method. I became completely unresponsive and emotionally uninteresting, starving manipulative people of the drama they wanted. I silenced their notifications and routed every one of their numbers directly to voicemail. The silence inside my apartment remained beautifully intact. At exactly 9 that morning, I called my attorney David. David was an aggressive, no-nonsense lawyer in his late 40s who specialized in commercial property disputes and high-stakes litigation. His firm had been on retainer for my construction business for years. I sent him the complete digital file, my signed lease, the smart lock logs, the police incident report, every photograph, and the $25,000 contractor estimate. He called me back 20 minutes later while I was driving to a job site. His voice came through the truck's Bluetooth system. Vance, I've reviewed everything. This is bulletproof. The illegal eviction alone gives us grounds for significant statutory penalties in this state. The property damage is the final nail in the coffin. Do you want me to send a demand letter to frighten him, or do we file the civil suit immediately? Skip the warning letter. File the lawsuit. Pursue the maximum damages allowed. And David, under no circumstances will we offer or accept a settlement. I want a judge to rule on it. Understood. He will probably argue that the damage was accidental or normal wear and tear caused while moving his belongings. Your photographs should destroy that defense. Still, it would be easier if we had evidence of a behavioral pattern, something showing that he damages property intentionally. That gave me an idea. During my lunch break, I made one specific phone call. 2 hours later, I sat beneath the shade of the patio at an overpriced, high-end coffee shop downtown. A large black luxury sport utility vehicle pulled up at the curb. Sophia stepped out wearing a tailored designer blazer and oversized dark sunglasses. She looked immaculate, unbothered, and noticeably lighter, like a woman who had finally removed 180 pounds of dead weight from her life. She joined me at the table, ordered an iced espresso, and offered a knowing smile. Vance, I have to admit, I was genuinely surprised to hear from you. I assumed you were part of the great family blockade against me. I'm not part of that family anymore. I looked directly at her and explained what had happened. The entry while I was in Texas, the stolen emergency key, the altered locks, the damaged concrete, the gouged Brazilian walnut floors, the police removal, and the civil lawsuit I had authorized that morning. Sophia listened without interrupting. When I mentioned the $25,000 estimate, she set down her drink and gave a dry, humorless laugh. God, he's predictable. He throws a tantrum, destroys expensive things he didn't pay for, and assumes someone else will clean everything up. He did exactly the same thing to me. That's actually the final reason I threw him out. She opened her leather handbag, removed a slim silver flash drive, and slid it across the marble table. I have an enterprise-grade smart home security system, too, inside and outside the estate. The afternoon I gave Ethan the divorce papers, he completely lost control. He took a metal golf club to my custom kitchen cabinets, then threw a heavy crystal vase through a vintage stained glass window in the foyer. I had my security team preserve the footage in case I needed an emergency restraining order. Everything is on that drive in high definition. I picked up the metal device. It was the exact evidence David had requested. It established a clear pattern of Ethan intentionally destroying expensive property whenever he became angry. Why are you giving this to me? Sophia adjusted her sunglasses. Because for 3 years, your parents treated me like a crazy, demanding wife simply because I expected their perfect son to behave like an adult. I want him to face the reality he has avoided his entire life. Take him to the cleaners, Vance. Ruin him. The civil court hearing was scheduled for exactly 6 weeks later. I arrived early at the downtown courthouse, wearing a dark, perfectly tailored suit. I felt completely calm. David met me in the marble lobby carrying a secure laptop and a heavy leather binder containing every printed exhibit. Together, we entered the wood-paneled courtroom and sat at the plaintiff's table. 10 minutes later, the double doors opened, and my family walked in together. The sight was pathetic. Ethan wore a cheap gray suit, at least one full size too large. He had probably borrowed it from the back of my father's closet. He looked pale, exhausted, and deeply nervous. His eyes moved constantly around the courtroom. My mother stayed close to his right side, looking frail and clutching a crumpled tissue. She appeared ready to produce strategic tears at any moment. My father walked behind them with his head lowered, refusing to make eye contact with me. They sat at the defense table across the aisle. The judge was a stern, sharp-eyed woman in her late 50s who looked completely intolerant of nonsense. She called the case and invited both sides to present their opening statements. Ethan's attorney was disorganized, and his suit was nearly as wrinkled as his arguments. He immediately described the incident as a tragic but simple family misunderstanding. He claimed my mother had given Ethan verbal authorization to use the apartment, that Ethan sincerely believed he was a welcome guest, and that any damage had been an accidental consequence of an emotionally stressful move. At precisely the right moment, my mother sniffled loudly from the gallery and pressed the tissue to her eyes, attempting to maximize the emotional effect. Then David stood. He never raised his voice. He ignored the family drama and presented the facts. First, he submitted the binding lease proving that I was the apartment's sole legal tenant. Then he connected his laptop to the courtroom monitor and displayed the smart lock data. He walked the judge through the exact time the emergency key was used and the manual reset performed 10 minutes later. Your Honor, David said, an invited guest does not erase the primary resident's electronic access codes and lock him out of his own home. These records demonstrate clear premeditation to occupy the property against my client's will. The judge nodded slowly and took notes. Her expression hardened. David then submitted my itemized $25,000 restoration estimate. Ethan's attorney immediately objected, claiming the figure had been deliberately inflated to punish his client. David responded by handing the judge 3 independent estimates from licensed general contracting firms in the city. Each of those estimates was several $1,000s higher than mine. My client is a licensed professional contractor, David explained. The defendant damaged custom, high-end materials and fixtures. We are requesting only the replacement value of those materials and the prevailing labor rates necessary to return the residence to its original condition. Then David clicked another file. The defense claims the damage was accidental. We are submitting video evidence legally provided by the defendant's former spouse. It establishes a documented pattern of malicious property destruction whenever the defendant experiences emotional distress. The video began playing on the courtroom's large monitor. Everyone watched in stunned silence as high-definition footage showed Ethan screaming, swinging a metal golf club into Sophia's custom kitchen cabinets, smashing the doors into splinters, then lifting a heavy crystal vase and hurling it through a vintage stained glass window. All color disappeared from Ethan's face. He sank into his chair and stared at the defense table. My mother stopped crying instantly. Her mouth fell open as she stared at the screen in genuine horror. My father buried his face in his hands. The carefully maintained illusion of the innocent golden child was now playing in high definition as part of the official court record. The judge did not need a recess. She looked over her reading glasses at Ethan with undisguised disgust. The evidence presented today is overwhelming. This was not a family misunderstanding. It was a calculated violation of property rights and the intentional, malicious destruction of a private residence. I am ruling entirely in favor of the plaintiff for the requested amount of $25,000, plus all associated legal fees and court costs. She struck the sound block with her gavel. The impact echoed through the room like a gunshot. The truth had been formally established. Outside the courtroom, the marble hallway was quiet except for distant sounds from other proceedings. David shook my hand, packed his files and laptop into his briefcase, and congratulated me on the result before walking toward the elevators. I remained beside one of the tall arched windows, watching traffic move through the city below. A moment later, the courtroom doors opened violently, and my family emerged. The weight of the $25,000 judgment had finally reached them. Ethan had no assets. He had no savings and no job. If he failed to pay, his future wages would be garnished the moment he found employment, and his already fragile credit would be destroyed. My parents understood what that meant. If they wanted to rescue their perfect boy from financial ruin, they would have to liquidate a substantial portion of their retirement savings. My mother separated from Ethan and my father and marched toward me. Her heels struck the marble floor with sharp, aggressive clicks. Her eyes remained red, but the sadness was gone. There was no pleading left in her expression, only fury. My father and Ethan remained near the courtroom doors, staring at the floor, too cowardly to approach me. "Are you happy now?" My mother hissed, stopping several feet away. "You've ruined your brother's life. You've practically stolen from your own parents. We're going to have to drain our retirement savings to pay this ridiculous, vindictive judgment. You destroyed this family over a stupid apartment." I studied her face. For the first time, I felt no anger and no betrayal. There was only a deep emptiness, as though I were looking at a stranger whose personal problems had nothing to do with me. "I didn't destroy anything. Ethan broke the law. You enabled him and encouraged him. A judge held him responsible for his own actions. That is how the real world operates outside your living room." "He's your younger brother," she shouted, her voice echoing down the hallway. "Family is supposed to love each other unconditionally. Family forgives mistakes. Family is supposed to love and treat each other better than strangers. If a stranger broke into my home, changed my locks, and intentionally caused tens of thousands of dollars in damage, I would have demanded maximum criminal charges. I would have made sure that person went to jail. I allowed Ethan to leave with a civil penalty. Taking his money instead of taking his freedom was my final act of mercy toward this family." I held her gaze. "Do not ever contact me again." Before she could answer, I turned and walked toward the elevators. As I moved, I opened the contacts on my phone and permanently blocked her number, my father's number, and Ethan's number. The polished elevator doors opened with a quiet chime. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. My mother's shocked, pale face disappeared behind the closing metal doors. The final lock on my life clicked shut. 6 months passed after the court ruling. Late autumn gave way to early spring, bringing new life and warmer air into the city. One evening, I stood on the private rooftop terrace of my building, using metal tongs to turn a thick, perfectly marbled ribeye on my stainless steel grill. The air smelled of wood smoke, charred meat, and the faint, cool saltiness of the breeze drifting from the harbor. Behind me, the heavy sliding doors to my loft stood wide open. The apartment was pristine. In fact, it was better than it had been before. The full $25,000 entered my business bank account exactly 30 days after the judgment. I knew my parents had drained a significant portion of their retirement funds to pay Ethan's debt, but I did not lose a second of sleep over it. I used the money exactly as intended. I hired a specialized crew to grind, polish, and reseal the concrete kitchen island until it had a flawless, mirror-like finish. The damaged Brazilian walnut flooring was removed and replaced. The new planks were meticulously sanded and sealed, and the finished floor gleamed beneath the warm afternoon light. I also improved the security. The old smart lock was gone. In its place was a commercial enterprise-grade biometric fingerprint scanner protected by military-grade encryption. No physical emergency key could ever bypass the master controls again. My home had become an absolute fortress. "Those steaks are looking good, man," James said, as he stepped onto the terrace and handed me a cold bottle of imported beer. James was my oldest and most dependable friend. We had known each other since college, and he now worked beside me as a structural engineer. Give them 5 minutes to rest, I said, taking a long drink. Inside the brightly lit loft, three close colleagues from my construction firm sat around the dining table, laughing at a joke. Music played softly in the background. It was a small gathering, consisting only of people who understood the value of hard work, loyalty, and respect. Have you heard anything from them? James asked quietly as he leaned against the brick parapet and looked toward the glowing skyline. He did not need to explain who he meant. No, I said. And I never will. The boundary is permanent. Occasional updates still reached me through mutual acquaintances and distant relatives who watched my social media. Ethan was apparently still sleeping on my parents' uncomfortable sofa. He moved rapidly between terrible minimum wage jobs and blamed everyone else for his failures, especially Sophia and me. My parents continued complaining to anyone willing to listen about their cruel, ungrateful, cold-hearted eldest son. But their voices felt like a bad movie playing in another room, with the volume turned completely down. Their anger no longer touched me. It could not enter my life. I looked through the open doors at my home. Golden light reflected from the polished concrete island, illuminating tiny particles of dust moving through the air. The space was completely mine. I had earned it through my labor, designed it with my own mind, and defended it with cold, undeniable evidence. Sharing blood with someone did not entitle them to drain my sanity. Sharing DNA was not a blank check, allowing them to destroy everything I had painstakingly built. Some lessons were expensive to teach. Some bridges needed to burn completely so their fire could illuminate the road ahead. I removed the stakes from the grill and placed them on a thick wooden cutting board to rest. Then I breathed deeply, filling my lungs with the cool evening air and feeling a profound, unshakable peace. I was a builder. I had discovered rot spreading through the foundation of my life, and I had removed it completely. Now there was nothing left to do, except enjoy the strong, beautiful home I had built.